speaking of hatred, my understanding of the word misogyny is hatred of women. That's what I understand it to mean, according to definitions in various dictionaries. And it was Ivana Bacik who suggested last week that the bishops, the Catholic bishops, might themselves be guilty of hating women. Or perhaps she didn't mean hatred, perhaps she meant a lower regard for women in general. And we can't rule that possibility out. But we do ask the question. Well, we did invite Ivana on. She was unfortunately not able to join us this evening. So the question now we're asking is, did we really have a rational debate on abortion, or was there a little bit more emotion than we'd like to accept? Joining us now online is Gemma O'Doherty of the Irish Independent. Gemma, you're very welcome.
Good evening.
And we will be coming shortly to Eileen Reilly, who's a consultant gynaecologist, but also from Scotland, which we were talking about recently. She might give us an outside perspective on how she thinks the debate went. Gemma, what are your own thoughts on this? Did we have a rational debate?
Certainly, anyone reading...
You've been covering this quite in depth.
Anyone reading the papers over the weekend would have thought that the Health Committee hearings were utterly civilised and calm and extremely balanced. But I'm not sure if the media really scratched beneath the surface on this one, because it's certainly appearing now that some of the very important people whose views must be heard in this debate are not happy at all. Now, it's come to our attention that a group of obstetricians who are opposed to abortion legislation have written to the chairman of the Oireachtas Health Committee and are expressing their concerns that they have not been allowed to have their views heard at an oral hearing, and they are demanding that that happens. Now, a statement has been sent to Deputy Buttimer in which quite a sizable number of obstetricians are saying that they believe the legislation as proposed could actually interfere with their job, their ability to treat pregnant women to the best of their ability. What they're saying is that the last thing they need when they're dealing with these difficult pregnancies in the dead of night is to have to consult the law. These are decisions and these are practices that they learn when they're at med school. They're absolutely shocked at remarks that anybody within their profession would be going to jail, as was suggested at the Health Committee hearings last week. That has never happened in Ireland. And the suggestion also that a patient might go to jail, they are saying is absolutely absurd and scaremongering. They say that they carry out their work protecting both lives, but in a situation where it is absolutely critical that a mother's life must be saved. That is what they do. It is mother first, baby second, where a mother's life is in immediate risk. And they're very concerned that the public and expectant mothers are getting the wrong message here. And they've made it very clear to Deputy Buttimer and his Health Committee that their view as obstetricians needs to be heard in the interests of democracy. And also the fact that many Irish people do see this as a matter of life and death.
Bill, as a medical man, what do you think?
I think there is no such thing as an absolute. And I think that a lot of the Oireachtas debate or discussions were held at a much more civilised temperature than what went on in 1981, 82. That's the first thing, and I think that's true. Overall, there were exaggerations, I thought, on both sides. In other words, it was very good.
One from each side, maybe?
Yeah, well, what she said was true about, and the number of abortions that are necessary, and putting the mother first. And I thought that the performance, it wasn't really a performance, but what the lady from Temple Street or from Holles Street said was more or less accurate. I thought it was well thought out on both sides, but I don't think it was comprehensive. And what you're quoting from the gynaecologist that you were talking about just earlier, Mark, I think that just proves that it wasn't comprehensive, but it was like the truth, the whole truth, but it wasn't. It was truth, nothing but the truth, but it wasn't the whole truth, is the point.
Wendy, it isn't something that confuses the debate greatly, the positions of the Catholic Church, because while Catholics are entitled to have their view, many people feel that a Catholic ethos is should necessarily be the laws of the land. Now, in fact, abortion legislation dates from 1861, when it was a Protestant Parliament in Westminster which introduced it. Doesn't that give the pro-life side an opportunity to say, look, we're not coming at this from a Catholic angle at all. We're coming at it from a right to life angle, and therefore it would take a lot of the sort of religious divisiveness out of it and focus on what you regard to be the right to life of the unborn child. But you can't do that if groups like Catholic Comment, which are so clearly, religiously inspired, are sticking your oar in. Can it?
I suppose it goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier and that kind of bias. Are you saying because I openly am saying that I'm a Catholic that I'm not entitled to give the pro-life opinion? I think
No. What I'm saying is that it may inform your pro-life position.
Of course, yeah.
But in a pluralist republic, I don't think we should be a secular republic like France, where we shut religion out. But in a pluralist one, we have to find a common denominator of values that, don't just suit Catholics, but suit people from other backgrounds.
I think that the pro-life issue...
And the people engaging in public debate on an issue as sensitive as abortion, even if they're informed by Catholic values, don't they have an obligation to relate their values to non-Catholic citizens in a way that those non-Catholic citizens feel that they're not being forced into an ethos that they don't believe in?
Yeah, of course, I totally agree with you. I think that the pro-life issue is for people of all faiths and none.
Right, but your group is called Catholic Comment, which makes it a bit hard for non-Catholics to accept that view.
I think we're saying that, for me personally, I'm saying that I'm Catholic and I hold this view, but it's not because that I'm Catholic, it's just part of who I am. Yeah. And I suppose I would always say to everybody in this discussion that it doesn't matter what creed you're from or whatever belief system, all or none that you come from. It's about saying that we respect the right to life and we don't want to agree with the intentional killing of unborn children. And I think that in the debates in the Dáil, what we've seen is that there was a representation from lots of different faith backgrounds that we had seen, and Catholics, as much as people who have no faith, have a right to be part of civil society and the debates to take place in that. And you shouldn't be punished for having an opinion because of the faith that you kind of assign.
Gemma, as a journalist, do you think that you could say it's on both sides, couldn't you? You could say that Catholics are pushing, for a pro-life position because they want to support the ethos of their church. Equally, there are people whose support for abortion legislation may not be necessarily thought out in terms of the fundamental issue of women's rights or the rights of unborn children. It may be a knee-jerk reaction to Catholics, so that on both sides there's this debate that we should tell these people, go away and have your debate about secularism on another day. This is a more fundamental life and death issue, and these guys, the Catholics on one side and the secularists, they're just confusing the whole thing.
Well, you've raised so many points there. I think certainly as far as the Irish public are concerned, people who would have held very strong pro-life views prior to the tragedy in Galway did become very confused after that, and they actually did believe that a scenario could happen where a woman could die as a result of a law that does not exist, and that a doctor would strive to save a fetus that was not going to survive. Right. We know in this case that is what the couple were told. They were told that there was no hope for the fetus. When you analyse that scenario, as you have done, Mark, and I congratulate you for that, you realise the suggestion, that women's lives are in danger in Irish hospitals is just not the case. The statistics back that up. But I do think, Irish people are very compassionate. They got confused as a result of that case.
So you think Savita confused it, but what I was asking is slightly different question. Well, let me put it to Bill. Bill, imagine Man United are playing Man City, right? And suddenly Wigan and Tranmere come onto the pitch and start playing each other on the same pitch at the same time.
It's a little bit confusing.
It's going to be a little bit confusing, isn't it? My point is that you and I had a very rational conversation. Is it an unborn child? Does it have a right to life? That's really what it's about. If another set
It's
of
not,
people.
Mark. It's actually a lot more than that, and I'll tell you why. Because it's not exactly as simple as that. This Dr. Reilly has just made the point about the Halapanamar comments and the husband's comments in relation to abortion.
Gemma O'Doherty.
I'm very sorry, Gemma O'Doherty. Sorry, yes. Sorry, apologies, Gemma. And the point I would make about all of that is that you have to, as a medical practitioner, deal with the patient in front of you. The patient in front of you is a pregnant woman.
Yes,
the
and
patient
an
in front
unborn
of you,
child, many would say.
The patient in front of you. No, you're not. You're wrong. You're already. Hold on for a second.
Is that not the model that we operate under?
The patient in front of you is a pregnant woman. The fact that she's pregnant then brings in to
but you're automatically supposing that there's only one human being involved, which is a valid assumption, but doesn't that already...
I'm developing this in 3 sentences, if you allow me.
Okay.
The fact is that there is another individual then involved, which is the fetus.
Right.
And the first question is the fetus viable at such and such a time? In other words, do you do a caesarean section and remove a fetus for a woman who's seriously ill?
You call it a fetus, right? You call it a fetus.
Let's just leave me now. We won't get into the semantics.
No, Bill, we have to. Sorry, we have to.
Because I think pro-life is an outrageous description for some of these people.
Well, I think pro-choice is an outrageous description for some of these people because they deny the right to choose an unborn child's right to choose life.
If you let me finish.
So there's pejorative terminology on both sides.
There is, and I agree with you. And I agree.
And you can't begin a debate on a supposition that automatically slants the pitch in your direction. And you just did that. You used the word fetus to describe what I may regard as an unborn child. Some people would say that's a dehumanizing term.
Well, the fetus is what it actually is. That's like, to be quite honest, the fetus is what it is.
Well,
I speak English.
I could call you a Homo sapiens,
You can do what you like, but I'm describing the fetus as the fetus. And then, is the fetus viable? And after about 28 weeks, approx, or less than that, in certain circumstances, the fetus is. You then go back to the situation where the fetus is not viable, and the treatment is different.
We're getting into the substantive debate, and we want to debate whether the debate was actually logical. We were making some critical comments about Scotland, so let's allow, in the fair spirit of fair play, let's go to a Scottish lady, Eileen Reilly, who's online. She's a consultant gynecologist and obstetrician practicing Galway. Eileen, how do you think we have conducted this debate in Ireland in the last couple of weeks? And feel free to criticise us if you think we haven't come up to scratch.
Well, good evening. I saw a little bit of what's been on in the last couple of weeks, and it appears that the representation from the obstetrics side were 3 consultants who all were in favour of legislation, and I actually got a letter from your man Buttimer asking for a written submission, but the letter arrived on my desk 4 hours after the deadline, so it didn't really give you a chance to sort of voice what you thought of the situation. And I know of other obstetricians who are known to be pro-life weren't asked to attend the debate either, and I think that's unfair because it was a perfect opportunity, for the TDs to hear both sides of the argument. And the interesting thing I thought was when each of those obstetricians were asked, had they ever felt that their hands were tied and they weren't able to do what they needed to do to save a mother's life, all of them said they've never been in a situation where they couldn't do what they wanted to do. So you've got to argue then, well, why do they want legislation then? I think you just wonder, what's underlying it all.
All right.
I think maybe perhaps clarification is required in a doctor's training to know, but that should be part of a doctor's training to know what's the difference between essential medical treatment and an abortion.
Right. To give us some thoughts in just a couple of minutes, Scotland, I would imagine that one thing that does unite Catholics and Presbyterians in Scotland is that both sides, I think, are pretty critical of Britain's abortion law. Would I be right?
Well, it's the way the law stands, actually. People, yes, it's very polarised. There's people same as it is here. There's pro-choice and pro-life. But when it comes down to the fact that it's legal to terminate a perfectly normal fetus up to 24 weeks and an abnormal fetus up to term, that trumps everything else. And what actually happens is is doctors who are pro-life don't get involved in the termination clinics, so they don't really ever have an opportunity.
Are they blacklisted for not doing so?
Well, they're not allowed to ask you an interview, they say, but people quite quickly know whether you do terminations or not.
Right.
And I would say that in the majority of my training it was suspected that you didn't do terminations, but you could be put on the spot quite frequently. What could happen from time to time is maybe a woman turns up in the labour ward and she's in to get induced for a fetal abnormality.
All right.
And all of a sudden somebody realises there's only one doctor signed the form.
Okay, Eileen and Gemma, would you be kind enough to stay with us for a bit longer? We've got a news break coming up. But just another texter asks, why are atheists allowed to practice their scientific quote-unquote faith in the public sphere, but Catholics, young and old, are continually be forced to practice theirs in the private sphere? Fair play to Wendy for having the courage to speak out as a Catholic. I think that's a fair comment, Bill, because science, what we now understand to be science, will be turned on its head in 40 years. Science is it's more precise than religion.
Albert Einstein was vindicated again recently when CERN thought he was wrong, if you remember.
I remember, but he could be devindicated equally in a few weeks' time.
I know,
we don't know.
But there's one thing I see, one thing that's very interesting. I think science is fantastic. The thing that the unity of the universe and of nature through DNA and molecular chemistry is plain to see, and it's really, really interesting.
No, you could say that is
and you know something, Mark, as soon as you think you know something in science, you find out you don't.
Yeah, but
it's very intelligently designed, the world.
But science is very well. You could argue that the patterns that science picks up are not necessarily any disproof of the existence of God. I'm not patterns in
Mark,
creation.
I'm not going to argue with you. I happen to agree with you on that, because it depends on your definition of God.
I don't know. I may be wrong. Maybe there is no God.
But it depends on your definition of a God.
I just don't buy this idea that science is necessarily.
We had Michael Nugent in here and we had a disagreement because you said I was an atheist and I said I wasn't, if you remember that. And this was 6 months. Bill. No, Mark, I know what I actually think.
What you are. Now we are going back to Eileen Reilly, who are waiting patiently online, and Gemma O'Doherty. We're going back to this idea of, did we have a rational debate on abortion? Gemma, is there any prospect for another round of hearings in the Oireachtas, as many gynecologists and obstetricians would seem to desire? Round two, so to speak.
Yes, I suspect there may well be, but I think there is a suspicion it may come too late. I know that this evening there was talk that the committee possibly will concede to hearing from the growing number of obstetricians who are expressing an opposition to abortion legislation, but they will do so around Easter when the heads of bill is published. Now, that's not going to be acceptable to them. You know, we've had an awful lot of media attention over the last few days, and if it's going to happen, you know, it needs to happen now.
Right.
And it needs to happen in front of the cameras. This is what these men and women are saying. And I think in the interest of democracy, they have a very good point.
Okay, Eileen, I hope this isn't an unfair question to ask you, but you are based in Galway. What are your thoughts on the death of Savita as it relates to this debate? Was it misused to prompt a debate, which has led us to a very different aspect of it, as whether to legislate for suicide or not? And secondly, should we await the findings of the inquiry into the death of Savita before legislation?
Well, I certainly do think the Savita case is certainly hijacked, definitely by the pro-choice lobby to further their agenda. There's no doubt about that. I mean, we don't really know the facts of the case yet. That, you know, it's still under investigation.
Wait for an inquest.
And I think we have to wait till the inquest is out. But certainly there are cases of chorioamnionitis that happen, you know, in hospitals, and I mean every case is different, but it's very easy with hindsight, you know.
Right.
But certainly it's created a lot of fear and confusion amongst lay people, in particular, and frightened a lot of people unnecessarily, unfortunately.
Right.
People have jumped to conclusions before they know the facts.
Bill, that seems to be, I mean, I saw Conor Brady last week writing in the Irish Times saying, but for the death of Savita, we would not be having the hearings in the Oireachtas. I think even people on the pro-choice side are...
I agree with that. We discussed that in here, Mark, and I said that, rightly at the time, that all of these inquiries and everything else, that there is a statutory inquiry set up. It's called the Coroner's Inquiry, called an inquest, and it's going there from about 1180. So let's wait to see what exactly happened.
You don't mind me describing it as pro-choice, but you would believe, would you not, that we should at least wait for these inquiries to finish before we legislate? Of course
we should, Mark. I think it's intellectually dishonest to hang your hat on the unfortunate death of a woman when you don't know the facts.
Gemma, what do you think will be the reaction in the Dáil, in the commentariat, if indeed the government proceeds to publish the heads of a bill before we have any of these inquiries reports available?
Well, I mean, we've seen how the media has behaved in the last 4 months since the tragedy in Galway. I would fear that the government will be allowed to do whatever it likes, as long as it's in line with the pro-choice lobby.
Excuse me, I disagree entirely with that. The government is constrained by the constitutional referendum and the Supreme Court rulings, so the government can't do whatever it likes. What I would personally like, and I've stuck it down as a motion in Dublin City Council, if Article whatever it is 43.3 was removed from the Constitution entirely, so that we could deal with this in a rational fashion.
What do you think of your former glorious leader John Bruton's comments a couple of days ago when he said the Supreme Court was wrong to in its ruling, which said that suicide was grounds for abortion, that in fact it should be ignored? John Bruton isn't exactly, he's not a secular liberal, but he's no fundamentalist either, is he?
John Bruton's a very Catholic individual, very conservative individual, in my opinion. But I want to say this.
I'll bring you in a minute. I just want to get Bill as the resident blue shirt here. What does Bill think?
You could argue that it was a little bit stage left for the Supreme Court to do what they did, and at the time my feeling of it was that it was an incorrect judgment, and that it was used because the judges on the Supreme Court at that time, maybe I have to be very careful because am I allowed to say, Mark, what I want to say, really? I mean, what I'm saying is that they decided...
Bill, err on the side of discretion.
Maybe I'll say nothing further about it because I'll upset the...
you can say it next week, run it past me
producer,
first. Gemma, you wanted a word there.
Well, I mean, whatever about the thoughts of our former Taoiseach, I think it's very important. And again, this is something that got very little coverage in the media over the last few days, is the fact that the medical experts in the form of the psychiatrists last week all agreed that abortion is never a treatment for suicidal ideation, and that, again, has not come out.
It has. It was published, I think. All right, Bill. I want to get Gemma. Please finish your point, and I'd like then to turn to Wendy. Gemma, please.
Well, I mean, I know that certainly the obstetricians who are expressing very serious concerns about proceeding with legislating for X are saying that a doctor with responsibility to two patients, which is the Irish model, is the two-patient model. And I have to say, as a woman, I think most women and most mothers-to-be would be delighted to think that every opportunity will be given to their baby who is coming into this world. And I know that that is an instinct that every woman feels when they are pregnant, that a doctor will do absolutely everything to protect their future child. But they are saying, these doctors are saying, that when faced with terminating a normal pregnancy on the grounds of suicide risk, that they would be placed in an impossibly conflicted situation because there is no known benefit to the mother.
All right. Wendy?
Yeah, I mean, of course I agree with Gemma there. I think that one thing that has come out throughout the course of the last few days is that unanimously pro-choice and pro-life psychiatrists both say, as Gemma says, that abortion is never a treatment for suicide. And in fact, on both sides, they have said that if a woman is already suffering from mental health problems, that it might in fact increase her risk. So it's kind of counterintuitive then for us to be discussing it in the first place, when in the 20 years since X we have such vast evidence and expertise to say, well, actually, no, this isn't the best thing for women. And we've, even though, as we've talked about the imbalance perhaps that's been in the discussions, we've talked about the obstetricians, and I know 6 out of 7 of the legal representatives, they were pro-choice, and I think we're asking the question, well, what was the selection process?
Before I give the final word to Eileen, a brief word from you, Bill.
I just want to say, in relation to the psychiatrist, psychiatry is to some extent qualitative, and opinions are just that, opinions, and I do not agree with absolutes. I think they're simply wrong. All you have to do is wait in your practice, and somebody somewhere along the line is going to find a case where they're proven wrong. So I would be very loath to hang your hat on it, but it is generally true to say that abortion would not be a treatment for depression.
Well, it is absolute.
Eileen,
somebody
please.
who has an abortion, that's absolute as the baby will die.
Final word, please, to Eileen Reilly.
Sure, I entirely agree, and I've seen it in that.
Who are you agreeing with, Bill?
I'm entirely agreeing that that an abortion is never a solution for a woman who's suicidal, and you see time and time again people's mental health actually being worsened by the guilt and the trauma of going through an abortion, and they've got no one to turn to. Once they go to a termination clinic, have a termination, then they don't know who to turn to when they're feeling bad afterwards. They turn to drink, they turn to abusive relationships, and
don't accept it.
Their studies have shown that these women, there's a good study in Denmark that showed that they looked at a cohort of women who had terminations, a cohort of women who went ahead of their pregnancies, and so they were 10 times more likely to be dead by the age of 65 than the group who went had a termination.
All right, thanks to Gemma O'Doherty and to Eileen Reilly for joining us tonight.